afternoon, everyone. There we go. There we go. Excellent. First of all, a huge thank you to DVAU and to Janice for inviting me. It's very, very exciting to be here. My heart is pounding, and it's not because I'm nervous to speak in front of a group. It's still pounding from the events that happened in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday. And so I'm excited to be able to share some of that, as well as use that as a way to engage on the topic to speak about today around faith communities and the fight for not LGBT equality, not marriage equality, but this idea that we call lived equality, and to talk a little bit about that. And then I definitely wanted to give quite a bit of time for folks to ask questions with some fantastic answers about the cases. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know that people are wondering lots of things, and I'll do my best to answer those where and when I can. So the fight for marriage equality has been going on for a long time. We'll just leave it at that number. But one of the earliest examples of the fight for marriage equality was in the early 1970s when a gay male couple went to the clerk's office in Minneapolis and requested a marriage license, which actually sparked the first same-sex marriage court case to reach the Supreme Court. What case was that, you might ask? Well, it's the Baker case, and the reason you may not have heard of it is because the Supreme Court decided not to hear it. And they decided not to hear it because they said that there was no fundamental question to be resolved, because two guys getting married, that's not a marriage, so they just didn't even bother to hear it. Which in hindsight was probably better for us in some ways, because it didn't create any sort of historical record or jurisprudence for other folks to use to further to discriminate against same-sex couples. But like this group and like many other groups who often find their voices outside of the mainstream, it didn't stop our movement from moving forward. We continued to push and to educate and to file lawsuits and to work to educate our legislators. And a lot of the public, kind of the public view of this campaign was working through the legal and the political process. And as we know, a lot of LGBTQ rights took a step back in the 80s and early 90s around the HIV and AIDS crisis, which affected so many communities outside of the LGBTQ community. But so much of our energy and efforts were really focused on keeping our friends and loved ones alive, and to fighting against a political system that criminalized our love, that criminalized a disease that was affecting our community, and really to try to push that forward. While we were still in an HIV and AIDS crisis, as we moved out of some of the acute phases of that, we started to see some additional movement forward on the fight for marriage equality. And it started primarily in Hawaii with a new court case. And it was the first court case that found that same-sex couples had a constitutional right under the Constitution of Hawaii to get married. That case was brought by my friend Evan Wolfson, who now leads the group Freedom to Marry. And unfortunately, as that was being appealed, the Hawaii legislature amended their constitution to ban same-sex marriage. And it also caused a backlash in Washington, D.C. with the passage of the Defense of Marriage Act. Because there was such a concern that if one state were to legalize marriage, then we would all get on a plane and go and fly there and get married. But really, we just wanted to go to the beach. But then you would have folks coming back and demanding that their relationships be recognized as they should have, because if you were to get married in a state and you were a straight ally, you would want your marriage to be recognized no matter where you lived, worked, or played. And so as this began to move through the system, one of the things that we discovered, and I put that in quotes because I think it's pretty obvious, is America is a country of people of faith. Like that, dislike that, indifferent about it. The vast majority of people identify with a particular religious belief. And all those folks were hearing from people who they felt were giving guidance on morals and ethical values was that LGBTQ people were ill, that we were somehow damaged goods, that marriage has always been a union between men and women, and that that's how it should stay, and that you know, huge and cataclysmic effects would come about if we were to ever change that. And so while a large portion of our work was engaged in the political process, what we began to discover and realize is that if you want to bring people to understand and to see your point of view, and hopefully to change hearts and minds, you can't stand over here and ask them to walk across the field to you. We had to walk across the field to them and meet them where they were at. And we had to meet them with people that they trusted, and we had to meet them with people that spoke the language of their particular faith community. And we had to speak to them with the language of truth, because what we knew was that the vast majority of people of faith were good people. They were kind people. They loved their neighbor. They loved their family members. But they had only heard one side of the story. And so that type of engagement within a few key denominations and with faith leaders, working side by side with people not of faith, of movement leaders, of people across the spectrum, started to have a very profound effect on the consciousness of marriage equality here in the United States. And what we began to realize, what we began to emphasize with folks, is that hate is not a faith value. And discrimination is not a faith value. It never has been. In fact, one of the key lessons from almost every religious tradition around the world, no matter how old or young it is, was the golden rule: to treat each other how we wanted to be treated. And when we spoke in that language, and we used that vocabulary, not only could we speak to people of no faith, we could speak to people of very strong faith, because everybody could resonate with that value that they grew up with, whether from their parents, their faith leaders, whether from the classroom, whether at work. It was a pretty standard thing. And we got people to start talking about this. And when we were able to engage folks to start talking, we started to hear a lot of the concerns as well. And from most of the laity on the faith side, it wasn't so much about this is what the book says, as far as people that were open. Many of them were very afraid and angry at being labeled as hateful and bigoted, and didn't understand why this was the vocabulary that was being hurled at them. They thought of themselves as good people. They raised good families, they raised good children, they contributed to their community. And that's where the discussion around this idea of where does sacred space fall? Are faith traditions predominantly about exclusion and pointing fingers, or is it predominantly about opening one's arms, trying to engage, listening to other people, getting to know people, and living in a community side by side? Because